Hi, hello, and welcome to Ever So. This will be a reading of There Is a Pod in Here by Lonely Sound Lonelies. Summary: Midori Izuku was just barely keeping his grades afloat. It was a hard thing to do when you were quirkless, because quirkless people were less evolved beings and couldn't possibly be up to par with their quirk classmates. And better than them? An impossibility. Alternatively, all of Izuku's teachers have accused him of cheating. Until now. Outer notes. My preoccupation with writing stories about Izuku's horrible childhood is showing itself again. Smiley face. I hope that you guys enjoy it. First year. I know that this material is hard to understand, Midoriya-kun, but that does not justify cheating. Shibata-sensei frowned down at Izuku from across the wide expanse between her desk and the desk across from hers where Izuku sat picking at her fingernails anxiously underneath the table. Izuku had not cheated, and had actually felt particularly good about this test. So naively, he replied, "I didn't cheat." A question mark tacked onto the end serving as a safety net underneath a tightrope. Shibata-sensei frown deepened and she stapled her hands together before pointing them at Izuku. You were the only person in class to get above a 70 on this test. Shibata-sensei lowered her voice and said her next word slowly. The only person. Izuku was not following Shibata-sensei's logic. He tilted his head to the side in confusion. Shibata-sensei sighed, a long and drawn-out thing that settled over Izuku's shoulders. He found himself slouching, ducking his head down as Shibata-sensei pinched the bridge of her nose. I am disappointed in you, Midoriya-kun. You haven't caused any problems so far this year despite your intensive disciplinary records from your primary school teachers. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that perhaps you had gotten your act together. Moving from elementary school to middle school is a big chance. And maybe you had decided to get serious about your behavioral issues, but now I see that was all just a guise. Izuku's head was reeling. I don't know how you managed to get your hands on the answer key, but you need to know that I have a no tolerance policy for cheating. I'm going to give you a break this time, only because I'm sure that if you hadn't cheated, you would have done just as bad as the rest of the class. This will be your only warning, Midoriya-kun. If I catch you cheating again, I will report it to the principal and it will be noted on your permanent record. Shibata-sensei shuffled some papers around on her desk before dragging Izuku out from the pile. This time, and this time only, I will give you a 50, which will become a 70 after the curve, but you need to acknowledge that I am being very lenient with you because I want to believe that this is a one-time event. Shibata-sensei crossed out the green 100 and replaced it with a 50 in red pen. Izuku blinked. You are dismissed, Midoriya-kun. Make sure you close the door on your way out, please. Shibata-sensei waved a hand at him. Izuku stood and collected his backpack woodenly, sliding it over his shoulders and then extending the other arm to catch the second strap. He eyed Shibata-sensei. As he started walking towards the door, he half expected her to break out into a laugh and tell him that it was just a prank. because that was really the only explanation that makes sense, because he didn't cheat. Izuku paused with his hands on the doorknob. He replayed the conversation in his head. Shibata-sensei seemed convinced. He wasn't sure what he could do to change her mind. Izuku left the classroom, nodding to himself that this was a fluke. He had been studying more than his classmates, and the scores were really so low, it kind of seemed like the logical conclusion that Izuku had an unfair advantage. It wouldn't happen again. This was middle school. It wasn't like elementary school where anyone could point at Izuku and say, "He did it," and get away with it. Things would be different. Midoriya-kun, I thought we understood each other last time. Shibata-sensei was standing over his desk, one hand splayed over the paper that she had just slammed down in front of him, a green 100 visible between her fingers. Izuku swallowed. We did. I didn't. Shibata-sensei let out an aggravated noise, close to a growl. It was not a noise Izuku expected a teacher to make, and he flinched. Only one other person in the class got a perfect score on this test, and your answer matched theirs exactly, Midoriya-kun. Shibata-sensei held up another test with a matching green score across the front, with scribbled question marks next to it. Kamado-kun clearly worked hard for his score. You will not be allowed to ride on his coattails just because you sit next to each other, Shibata-sensei continued. Izuku felt a familiar dread condense in his stomach. But I didn't cheat, I promise. So you're saying that Kamado-kun cheated off you? Shibata-sensei made it very clear with her tone that she did not believe this alternative form of event and never would. Even if Izuku spouted off all of the hours he spent studying, even if he retook the text and got the same score, even if he ran to his mother to get testimony to his intelligence, Shibata-sensei would never side with Izuku. Izuku tried to explain himself on instinct, but then swallowed his tongue. Leaning away from Shibata-sensei, accusatory glare, heart crawled up Izuku's throat and tears formed in his eyes. Izuku blinked harshly, once to try and dispel them, not wanting to cry in front of his teacher. Behind the heat that was overtaking Izuku, he heard Hibata-sensei sigh, and she leaned away from him. Izuku rubbed his eyes furiously with the palm of his hand, clearing his vision to see Shibata-sensei sitting on the desk diagonal to him with her arms and legs crossed, her heeled foot tapping at the air impatiently. "Are you done now, Midoriya-kun?" she asked. Izuku gritted his teeth against the stub and nodded, still wiping tears off his cheek while he tried to focus on his teacher. "As I said before, I have a no-tolerance policy towards cheating. This will be going on your permanent record, and since I can tell that you regret your actions, you will only have to go to detention for the next week." Izuku's mind spun. If this was put on his permanent record, there was no way he could apply to UA. They had a very strict background check policy. It was why Kachan hadn't tried anything yet in their first weeks at middle school, feeling out their teacher's tolerance. A sharp elbow there, a casual calling of Izuku Nixon's ear, always with his eyes on the teachers, waiting for a flinch or a widening of the eyes. It had not yet come. Izuku was sure that Kachan would push things soon, and that it would only get worse from there, but he was enjoying his first few weeks. He was grateful that Kachan had some faith in their teachers, even if Izuku didn't. That he could believe that people might one day protect Izuku. Izuku was now no longer harboring such fantasies. He knew that his teachers wouldn't save him. It wasn't their responsibility. It was just that he hadn't expected this either. Accusations. Midori Izuku was not a cheater. And yet his permanent record would now forever say otherwise. Izuku would not be able to get into UA or any other hero school worth his salt with a cheating accusation on his middle school record. The tears on his cheeks were hot. So hot, Izuku felt pain as I scalded his cheeks, pain as another part of Izuku's dreams were crushed on their untender heart. If he couldn't get into UA, or Shiketsu, or Ketsubaru, then how would he prove to them that he was good enough to be a hero? How could he show that he was good? That he was useful if he couldn't even make it out of middle school without marks on his record? The answer was that he couldn't. Those schools would never let someone quirkless in, let alone a quirkless delinquent. The next test that they took, Izuku marked 10 of his answers as wrong and received an approving nod from Shibata-sensei the next morning. Second year. Izuku-kun. Yamashita-sensei began, a sheeping smile on his face. I'm going to be honest with you. I was dreading having you in my class. Izuku's shoulders hunched, the overlarge uniform wrinkled with the movement. When I saw your record, and that you were quirkless, well, I didn't have much hope for you. Cheating marks at the beginning of the year, and then later on fighting, tardiness, vandalism, all in your first year. Yamashita-sensei shook his head and folded his hands on top of his desk. But then you came into class, and you were so well-mannered and quiet, I thought that perhaps you had turned a new leaf. Izuku nodded along demurely, dread growing with each word Yamashita-sensei spoke. After the first mark on his record, it was like a dam had sprung. Any classroom duties that had been neglected were obviously Izuku's responsibility, no matter whose name was on the chart. Any brawls in the hallway started because Izuku threw the first punch. We all saw it, sir. Honestly, Tsubasa-kun was just defending himself. Being locked in the janitor's closet was not a good reason for being 5 minutes late to the class. And what were you even doing in there in the first place? The fact that the only thing carved into Izuku's desk were insults was inconsequential to the fact that it was his desk and his responsibilities. None of the other students' desks were in such state. Izuku should really learn to take better care of his things. Yamashita-sensei unfolded his hands and passed a piece of paper across his desk towards Izuku. I can see now that I was incorrect. Yamashita-sensei tapped the score at the top of the paper. A cheery 97 in red pen with a half-completed good job that was scribbled over. Yamashita-sensei maneuvered his chair so that he was in front of his computer. I'll be contacting the principal about adding another mark toward cheating in your record, and you'll receive 0 for this assignment. If I see any cheating moving forward, that will be another 0, and you'll fail my class. Is that understood? Yamashita-sensei gave a stern look to Izuku from behind his computer screen and then continued tapping on his keyboard. I do suggest that you try and improve your behavior with Midoriya-kun. I know that so far in life you have scattered others' pity and kindness, but I will not allow you to take advantage of your peers like that. As a quirkless individual, you are more inclined to leash off others, but that is something that you can, and I expect you to control. Do the work, Midoriya-kun, and you'll be fine. It was silly to think that second year would be different. Zuko did his next assignment very carefully. It was difficult to gauge what Yamashita-sensei would accept as his work. Was an 80 too high? A 70? How should he space out the wrong answers? What kind of mistakes would look believable? Izuku's second year of middle school was a long year, full to the brim with red pen marks and straight A's barely kept afloat by after-school tutorials. Izuku's only chance at getting into a good high school were his grades at this point. His permanent record was so marred by any self-respecting school would take one look at it and deny him even a chance to sit at the entrance exam. Izuku had expected his school photograph to be posted in the security offices of high schools all across Japan with "Dangerous Delinquent" written across the bottom so that he would be stopped at the gate just in case someone got past their screening process. Izuku had his quirk analysis notebook open on top of his math notebook. The added height of the two notebooks stacked on top of each other made it slightly difficult to write. That, combined with the open textbook next to him, made his desk cramped and overall a bad work environment. But he had to be there. Izuku finished the paragraph he was writing in his analysis notebook and then swapped it for his math and ran through one of the practice questions, purposely recreating an error that he noticed his seatmate make early in the day. Izuku raised his hand and controlled his expression into something confused and frustrated. Yes, Midoriya-kun? Yamashita-sensei asked, looking up from his grading. Do you think you would help me with this problem, Sensei? I want to do better on the test, but I just don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Izuku had a system. Of course, Midoriya-kun, Yamashita replied. He got up from his chair and grabbed a pencil from the cup on his desk before coming to look over Izuku's shoulder. Oh, I see. Yamashita circled a part of Izuku's work where he had foiled to the wrong part of a polynomial. You multiplied the wrong place. Here. Oh. Izuku drew out, tapping his lips with his pencil. So you only multiply to the numbers inside the parentheses. Exactly, Midoriya-kun, look at you. Yamashita-sensei ruffled Izuku's hair. The feeling of his fingers made Izuku prickle, but he sat appropriately still and then smiled up at his teacher when he was done. Thank you, Sensei, Izuku replied quietly, always quietly, with his head tucked down and his shoulders in a submissive slump. Yamashita-sensei walked back over to his desk, and Izuku glanced at the clock. 15 minutes. Perhaps 17? Would be enough for Izuku to finish 5 more problems before Yamashita started getting suspicious. But it would also be enough time that Yamashita wouldn't feel like Izuku was being bothered. Izuku moved through the questions and had 6 minutes left. 8 weeks of school left. 15 more assignments, he could score below an 80 and still get an A. 3 people who might be waiting to ambush him after class. 500 yen. His mom gave him for lunch that was going into his piggy bank once he got home because the cafeteria was just a little bit too frightening today. Izuku got very good with numbers his second year of middle school. A year filled with percentage, unhelpful charts with the school guidance counselor, bruises in various stages of healing, and an ever-pleasant sinking feeling in his stomach. It was a year that made Izuku realize that he did not have to worry about believable mistakes or not creating patterns with his wrong answers. It was a year of calculating test scores and single-handedly done group projects, the only projects that was allowed 100 on. That Izuku realized he was never going to be found out by an obviously fake answer with all of the correct work above it, or a clearly erased name on his answer sheet, or a rough draft that was better than the graded final paper. Everyone would always believe that Izuku could do worse. He wasn't completely sure how he hasn't pulled it out sooner. He did not have to make it believable. He could just put a frowny face on a question that was easier than the one he got right, and Yamashita-sensei would nod like it make perfect sense. It was only the smart part that had to be believable. Third year. And honestly, at this point I'm surprised you haven't been expelled. Maybe you got to stop picking fights. During your first year I figured it was just you. Inka paused here, and Izuku watched his mother wring her hands together while she tried to find a nice way to say that she thought Izuku was protecting himself against the no doubt countless amounts of bullies that were foaming at mouth to pick on a quirkless kid. Well, I figured that you were just adjusting to middle school life. Izuku steadily picked at his cuticles under the breakfast table. Was she going to bring up his recent suspension next? The amount of time he spent out of the house? Or maybe their last dinner with the Bakugols, where Izuku admitted that he was still planning on applying to UA even if he had no chance in hell of getting in. Mitsuki and Inko had exchanged worried looks. But now we are almost at the end of your third year and you're still getting into all this trouble and you're never home. Another pause here. Izuku picked up his spoon and ate a bite of oatmeal. And now you're talking about wasting your time with schools that you have no chance of getting into. Izuku didn't flinch when Anko slammed her hand on top of the table. The dishes clattered together gently. Izuku spooned another bite of oatmeal into his mouth with one hand and rubbed at the dark circles under his eyes with another. After school yesterday, he had to clean gum from underneath all desks, but if he didn't show up to the tutorials at least once before the science exam, then there was no way that Hirabayashi sensei would believe that 72 that would keep Izuku grade at solid 91, so he had to go to the science tutorials and work through the study guide that he had already completed. After scrunching his eyebrows together and pretending to be frustrated for an hour and a half, Izuku went about completing his punishment. Therefore, despite not being in any clubs, Izuku ended up trying to shove his shoes onto his feet before the boys' baseball team could round the corner, their voices echoing through the mostly empty corridors. Namita-sensei is so annoying. I swear our team is better at ground balls than anyone else in the league, but that doesn't fucking matter when Raibaru in junior high is just hitting them out of the park. Izuku's fingers pinged as his heel pressed down against it in his haste to get his sneakers on. When his foot finally sank in, Izuku freed the digit and wrapped his smarting fingers around his backpack strap. Izuku knew that there would be rounding corner now. He knew that he had no chance of not being spotted. It was with a speed that he had honed over the last 2 years of middle school that Izuku took off through the front doors of Altera Middle. He heard shouts of surprise from behind him, but Izuku was focused only on the feeling of rubber and gravel crunching together as he made a sharp turn, cutting through the pitiful landscaping that decorated the front entrance towards the nearest alleyway. Hoots and hollers echoed behind him, voices excited by a chase. Izuku picked up speed, his hands leaving the straps of his backpack to pump alongside his strides. "Hurry the fuck up!" the voice called behind him. "Deco has gone faster since last year." Izuku felt almost pleased by the compliment. Probably would have called back a thank you if his lungs hadn't been so focused on heaving in oxygen as his panting heartbeat urged him to go faster. The footsteps behind him sounded eerily like a pack of dogs. Each thunk of a sneaker hitting pavement echoed closely by another and another until Izuku had no clue if it was the entire baseball team chasing after him or if it was just a ragged-out group of friends. Scanning the street sign that Izuku made an upward left turn that made the group behind him laugh as they overshot the street. Another turn 2 streets down, then another after a block and a burst of speed to create a greater sense of distance and "Oh fuck this!" a boy called to his teammates. Izuku chanced a quick look over his shoulder and saw that he had his hands on his knees as he was looked up at his lolling friends through a sweat of sock fringe. "The arcane is right here." He raised one arm to point at the glowing sign. "This will be more fun anyway." Agreement came from his friends, and Izuku kept his pace up only until he found a convenience store that he could duck into. The small amount of satisfaction Izuku had at his trap working quickly evaporated when he remembered that the arcane was in the opposite direction of his house, meaning that his walk home would take twice as long. He didn't get home until the sun had already gone down and his mother had already put up the dinner she had made. There was a note on the counter that told him she would have words with him in the morning. No chance of getting it? How? Izuku felt that was slightly unfair. Really? He had good grades. Sure, he was in top of his class. That was impossible for someone like him. He would do better on the entrance exam. He would do his absolute best. And then maybe someone at the UA would take a chance on him. Obviously, he was applying to other schools too. Izuku didn't see the big issue. Applying to a lot of school moms, Izuku said. He used his spoon to stir his oatmeal and didn't meet his mother's eyes. It was too early for all this. You might have to be more specific about which ones you think are a waste of time, if you really want me to skip those exams. Inko clenched her jaw and stared at her son across the table, her hands still lying flat against the top. Don't make me say it, she said. Sadness and irritation waged a war in her chest. Izuku had another bite of the oatmeal. Okay. Inko's shoulders slumped. Izuku stood from the breakfast table and went to school. Summer. God, that was difficult, a girl with red hair and ram horns said as she stretched her arms over her head. Another examinee in the seat next to her had their head on the table. Black hair spread out elegantly across their shoulders and the desk. An air of defeat emanated from them. The boy diagonal to Izuku was nodding fervently, yellow eyes wide as he sought out the red-haired girl's gaze. That section about the derivatives? My high school only offered trigonometry. How was I supposed to know any of that shit? Yeah, I agree, the red-haired girl replied, doing an odd maneuver with her hand to tuck a piece of hair behind her horns. Izuku dusted the crumbs from his eraser off of his desk and went about collecting things. There was a guide to the entrance exam on the UA website. Right between the faculty button and the academic calendar was a tab labeled Entrance Exam. After clicking on that tab, one will find a link to a study guide created by the principal of the school, an itemized list of all topics covered on the exam and their corresponding high school courses, and links to frequently used practice websites. Izuku looked up from where he was putting his pencil case into his bag. The red-horned girl and the yellow-eyed boy were on their feet, shuffling down the aisle together. Izuku hesitated to stand up. He didn't want to lurk behind the budding friends. He didn't want to shuffle his feet forward at the pace of the pair in front of him. He did not want to prolong this day. The only relaxing part of Izuku's day thus far had been when he was taking the exam. There was a sentiment his fellow test-takers did not seem to share, if their slumped shoulders and dragging footsteps were anything to go by. Izuku had gotten up at an unorthodox hour, specifically to avoid being on the same train as Bakugo, and it was hitting him now. Staring at a small black Mary Janes and beat-up sneakers slowly making their way to the exit of the testing room. Izuku's vision went black around the edges for a moment, as he stood up to grab his backpack. A combination of poor sleep, skipped meals, and acute stress. Izuku got up at 7 in the morning and took a train to UA. From 7 to 8, he wandered the street around the UA campus. It was a place dotted with expensive coffee shops and stationery supply stores and gas stations with self-served ice cream and gaming cafes with light-up keyboards and corner stores that sold pork buns. And all things that the kind of kids that gone to best hero school in America could spend their petty cash on their parents gave them on after school. Izuku studied last-minute flashcards while he wandered, waiting for the exam to start, peeking into windows and staring down always as the sun slowly crept out over the horizon. At 8, they opened the doors for the examinees. From 8 to 8:30, Izuku endured the effects of his squandered effort in the form of school assigning seating. Baki was furious that Izuku was sitting in the exam. He, of course, did not say this to Izuku. That would disrupt the orientation speech, and Bakugo wasn't stupid. He wasn't going to get on anyone's bad side until his place in the hero course was set in stone. No, he wasn't vocal like he was at school. Bakugo just let the anger warp off him in silence. He threw an arm over Izuku's shoulders halfway from Mike's presentation and got a grip on Izuku's shoulder so tight that Izuku could see his knuckles turn white out of the corner of his eyes. After that, sitting in a room from 8:30 to 10:30, where for once everyone had the same amount of anxiety as he did, was a relief. And on top of that, with the way the proctor's eyes dug into each examinee that passed in front of his desk, Izuku's test results would be airtight. Izuku had a lot of experience with his teacher doing things they probably weren't supposed to do. Things like telling their students they wouldn't amount to anything and counting correct answers wrong and locking students in classroom for lunch detentions with nothing to eat. The list went on. Izuku had a lot of experience with teachers doing things they probably shouldn't. And the proctor looked like he was 2 seconds away from throwing the first child he saw step out of the line into a wall. Or at least, out of the exam. It was a comfort. After years spent under lazy and assuming gazes, the intense security of the proctor was welcome. This man would stand before anyone who denied Izuku's card and say something along the lines, "Impossible under my watch." When the couple in front of him finally made their way out of the overly large doors that UA seemed to favor, Izuku shouldered his bag and began making his way through the desk. The proctor was standing next to the teacher's desk, shoulders carrying a weight beyond that of a tired exam student. He had deep, dark bangs under his eyes, and a 5 o'clock shadows that was attractive despite being a mark of laziness. The exams were stuffed into a manila folder and held loosely at the proctor's side. Izuku couldn't help it. As he got closer to the door, he noticed that the proctor had a utility belt on, and from there all it took was his eyes darting down to the tactical shoes on his proctor feet and then up to what he had previously thought a scarf, for Izuku to come to the decision that this man was a pro hero. Most likely an underground hero based off the dark-colored palette and Izuku's lack of intimate recognition. Izuku met the proctor's eyes briefly, trying to remember underground heroes that operated out of Musutafu. Halfway through this unbanished staring, Izuku met the man's gaze. The proctor was also staring, though he was probably just wondering why the last kid in his exam room was taking so long to leave. Izuku flushed, a pink tinge quick to make his way across his cheeks and stain the tips of his ears. When the hero raised an eyebrow, Izuku gave a jerky nod and a whispered thank you to excuse his staring and avert his gaze towards his shoes. After the written exam, there was an hour break for lunch, and then students who had signed up for the hero course were welcomed back into the campus to take the practical exam. Even before President Mike's speech, Izuku had known that robots would be involved. UA had an admittedly impressive team striking down web content about the exam across all platforms, but they weren't good enough that Izuku wasn't able to dig up a few posts regarding the exam. Not that his knowledge had helped him much. UA did not allow you to bring anything they could classify as a support item unless it was absolutely necessary for your health during the exam. After a quick email to the school exam coordinator, Izuku learned that this included screwdrivers, blunt objects, and pretty much anything that Izuku could think to ask about that would give him an edge against the metal monstrosities that awaited him. So Izuku had no chance of passing the practical. He spent the hour break wandering across the streets that bordered UA until he found a relatively empty cafe to sit in and eat a cheap sandwich at. Izuku couldn't pass the practical, but he certainly has passed the written exam. He was certain of it. And students who scored high enough on the written exam but didn't pass the practical were given admission preference over those only applying to general education course. After all, UA was a school for heroes first and foremost. Through all of that, relied on UA looking past Izuku's intense personal record. UA did not accept students with marks on their permanent record. This was a fact that Izuku was well acquainted with, one that was thrown in his face every time his counselor and him had a meeting about his non-existent future. It was a fact that Izuku ignored today to sat the exam anyway. The truth, however, was that his so-called fact wasn't true. And Todoroki, number 2 pro hero in Japan and UA alumni endeavor, had spent 8 counts of disciplinary action taken against him for fighting on his permanent record when he applied to UA. Because this was something Izuku didn't know until after he got suspended for the first time. Only severe disciplinary actions such as suspensions make it into the permanent record. Lesser infractions might be included in a student's file as notes, but as far as UA was concerned, Endeavor was clean. Izuku had gotten suspended, 5 times over the course of his middle school career, so then all hopes was lost. There was no chance Izuku would get in. Except Yusugima Ruby, ranked pro hero number 5 in Japan, and UA alumni Mirko, got suspended twice in middle school. The record Izuku had managed to dig up from Geshuri Middle said that these suspensions were due to unprovoked extreme violence. Mirko once said in an interview that her suspensions were because she beat the shit out of some perverted sexist motherfuckers that were trying to take pictures of girls' volleyball team in the changing rooms after she had verbally threatened them with violence if they didn't stop. So there was light after all. Izuku wasn't optimistic about getting into UA, but it was possible. He did well on the written exam. He would most likely hardly fail on the practical, but maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would get lucky for the first time in his lifetime, and he would be allowed into his dream school. From where Izuku would blend in, mesh with the masses, make sure no one saw fit to take him down a peg. As long as he could keep his head down until he graduated, he would be granted a high school diploma that employees would be forced to acknowledge as a brand of competency. He wouldn't be completely useless if the best school in Japan had let him walk their halls. First year. Izuku picked up an eraser from the door. Izuku picked up an eraser from the floor and squinted at it. It was hard to tell with the way that it was worn down on one side, but it looked like it used to be a bunny. Izuku turned to look over his shoulders towards Koda. When they made eye contact, Izuku tilted his head to the side, inquisitively, and held up the eraser. Koda nodded, and Izuku smiled at him and headed towards his classmates, adjusting his backpack so that it sat comfortably on his shoulders as he walked. The classroom was partially empty. Half of the class going off to see some movie that had come out recently because they were only allowed to go out in groups larger than 4. Most of the time, that meant combining friend groups until you had an obnoxious large group that made making plans difficult. However, an overly large group was safer, and after the amount of villain encounters they had so far in the semester, everyone was happier when they had the capacity to outnumber villain. Everyone was also a bit happier when Izuku would come as well. Because, as Uraraka put it, Izuku plans were the best and always threw the villains off guard. And do you guys even remember summer camp when he literally had me and Sue launching across acres of forest? I mean, I know that some bad things happened after that, but oh my god, that was so brilliant and weird, and you, Izuku. But Izuku didn't want to see a movie, and the League hadn't yet made a reappearance since the whole kidnapping debacle, so Izuku felt like it was okay for him not to tag along to every class activity. Finally. Thanks, Midoriya, Koda whispered, tucking the bunny eraser into his pencil case. Do you? Koda cleared his throat and continued in a lower tone that Izuku had to lean into slightly to hear. Would you like to study with me in a bit? Oh sure, Izuku said, watching Koda pack up his things. As long as you don't mind me working things out at the same time as you. Koda rolled his eyes and opened his mouth, but before he could speak again, Aizawa appeared in front of them. Izuku watched as Koda's eyes widened and flickered back and forth between them. So, apparently the teacher was focused on him. Hooray! Izuku turned around, so that he was facing Aizawa head-on. Despite the craziness of the year, Izuku had managed to stay under the teacher's radar thus far. Midoriya, stay behind for a moment, Aizawa told him. Koda raised his eyebrows at Izuku as he maneuvered out of his desk. Izuku shrugged slightly and waved. They would just have to meet up later in the dorms. Once the door shut behind Koda, and it was just Izuku and Aizawa in the classroom. Aizawa scuffed a foot against the floor. Look, Midoriya, have you been feeling alright recently? Aizawa asked, a touch of awkwardness to the question. Yes, sir, Izuku replied instantly before the panic at Aizawa's question could fully form in his chest. Have I not been doing well enough on the practicals? I can put in more time for personal training. I promise I can keep up with... It's not your practice course, Aizawa interrupted. It's your ethics course. There have just been some inconsistencies that I want to speak with you about. Deja vu hit Izuku like a freight train. Had he been balancing his course? He couldn't remember. He honestly couldn't remember with what the USJ attack and the sport festival and his internship and the summer camp attack, he knew that he was completing schoolwork but had been making the work believable. Aizawa had a much sharper eye than his middle school teachers. Aizawa meandered back to his desk and Izuku numbly followed. You turned in an essay last week on spotlight heroes and social media performance, the do's and don'ts of living a life in the public eye as a hero. Aizawa sat down in his chair and leaned down to rummage through a file cabinet behind him. It was a good essay. You got an 81 and that rounded your grade to a 90 in class, but I have everyone turned in draws the week before, and there was a lot of points you made in draft that you didn't make it through to the final essay that will have improved your grade to something more up to par with what I would expect from you without villains interfering in your studies. There was a pause here as Aizawa unearthed Izuku's word for the assignment and turned to set it facing towards Izuku on the desk. There was a kind of bone-tired exhaustion in Aizawa's eyes as he finished his sentence. For once. Oh, I guess I was just distracted when I wrote the final draft. I'm sorry, sir. Izuku had never been confronted about a grade that was supposed to be better than what he had turned in. He wasn't sure what the next steps would be in this interaction. Aizawa signed. If you rewrite the essay and turn it before the end of the week, I will replace the grade. Aizawa gestured to the papers on the desk. Just follow your draft a bit closer. Izuku nodded and grabbed the papers from the desk. Shuffling around the papers, he found his draft. The edges of the draft were ragged, clearly ripped out of his journal. Izuku vaguely remembered a crossed-arm Bakugo grunting out that he had turned in Izuku's draft for him while he was in the bathroom. Izuku waved over his shoulders at Aizawa as he left. Looking down at the pages hastily ripped from his journal, thank God that Bakugo hadn't gotten the whole essay. Still first year, maybe a week later. Izuku still had not gotten used to Aizawa's intensity. Sitting at Hagakure's spot directly in front of Aizawa's desk added a closeness to Aizawa's security that Izuku had mostly managed to avoid up to this point. It seemed as if the entire school was waiting for one of them to talk. Even just a few moments after the bell, the halls were emptied of people and the noises they brought with them. There was no arguments between classmates, of sounds of sneakers squeaking against the tile to drown out the tension of a conversation not yet begun. When it became clear to Aizawa Sensei that Izuku would not be the first to speak, the man narrowed his eyes. You had the top score on the written exam of any incoming first years, including the recommended students. Izuku had not been aware of this. Good for me? Izuku asked. And yet, Aizawa continued, you have consistently ranked in the just barely above the mark for an A throughout the school year. Silence consumed them once again. Izuku shifted in the desk and a metal creak echoed in the room. Aizawa straightened up slightly from his slouch position to put his elbows on the desk and lean forward. Izuku cleared his throat. I prepared for the exam for almost, really for the entirety of my last year of middle school, so Izuku trailed off. The implication of his work being that if his scores had dipped, it was because that was his true capacities were without months upon months of preparations. Izuku watched as Aizawa somehow frowned harder without changing his expression. Midoriya, have you single-handedly improved the quirks of Midoriya, you have single-handedly improved the quirks of everyone in this class. Izuku opened his mouth, not even sure how he was going to object, but knowing that he wanted to. Aizawa silently held up a hand and continued. And that skill set necessitates a base understanding of a total advanced topics. Chemistry, physics, and anatomy are just a few examples that I know you have a firm grasp on. And on top of that, you need to be able to articulate those ideas to your classmates in a way that they understood. So, you have communications and composition skills. Aizawa paused. Midoriya, I have seen your notebooks, I have watched your battle plans in action, and in one of grading your law and ethics assignment, and I know for a fact that you can do better. The question lurking within Aizawa's speech was, why? And what was Izuku supposed to say to this? Aizawa dragged a hand over his face when Izuku's silence continued. After our talk last week, I expected an uptick in your work quality. The start of the year was fraught with distractions, and the essay you turned in last week seemed like a peek at your true potential, and yet the quality of your work had stayed middle of the road. This prompted me to take a closer look at your work history, and I ended up going much deeper than anticipated. Aizawa reached to the side while Izuku's mind spun and opened a drawer. When I brought my concerns to the other heroes teachers, we took a look at your midterm, and then we took a look at the quality test and ended up going as far as referencing your entrance exam and rewatching the footage of your testing room. From the drawer, Aizawa pulled a stack of papers that he had stood up with. Izuku straightened. His shoulders met the back of the chair as Aizawa rounded his desk and leaned over Izuku's shoulder. Aizawa put down the papers in front of him. One of these is a question from a test you took in Snipe's class last week, and the other is a nearly identical question that was on the entrance exam, mostly to gauge how far along most of the students are in their studies, because Nezu hates for the teachers to waste time on an aptitude test. Aizawa tapped one of the papers hard enough that there was a tongue sound where his fingers hit the desk. Izuku. Midoriya, do you notice anything odd about this question? Midoriya swallowed. Izuku swallowed. Because the thing was that they were the exact same question. The one Aizawa was pointing to was from the entrance exam, as evidenced by Nezu's careful kanji at the top labeling it so, and Izuku had gotten correct. The other was decidedly not so. Izuku could vaguely remember choosing question 16 to average out the score, not remembering that it was on the entrance exam, and complete oversight on his part. Izuku licked his lips. Well, I must have forgotten how to do that one. It was a pretty difficult question. Izuku cringed at his own lame excuse. As I was silently laid another piece of paper down the desk, overlapping with the other two. It was homework from the week before Snap test, with a question similar to two beneath it, that Izuku had gotten correct. Well, now you're just dropping it in that I don't test well, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku mechanically brought a hand up to rub at the back of his neck in the mock embarrassment. Said the student who got the highest score on the written exam in the UA history. Aizawa deadpanned. Izuku clenched his teeth. I didn't know that, he said, feeling embarrassed. Real embarrassment this time, rising up slowly from his stomach. How could he make such a stupid, sloppy mistake? Because you didn't think anyone would be paying attention. Why would they? A voice that sounded like his mother whispered. Because you didn't think anyone would be paying attention. Why would they? A voice that sounded like his mother whispered in the back of his mind. Why would they? Izuku thought hastily. His entire life had been him trying to prove to other people that he could do better than what was expected of him. It was fully out of left field for someone to think the opposite. Aizawa sighed again. Izuku's embarrassment soared to a new height, accompanied by a scratchy feeling in the back of his throat and a sound like static pressing against his eardrum. That was supposed to do what he was supposed to say. Aizawa dropped the rest of the papers on Izuku's desk and then walked around so that he was leaning against the teacher's desk in front of Izuku. Nezu had taken it upon himself to adjust your grades by cross-referencing your homework, past exams, and entrance exam work against any suspiciously wrong questions, but he had requested that you stop playing around and start taking your education seriously. In accordance with this request, he had scheduled for you to take tests during your lunch breaks for the next 3 days, including an oral English exam in which President Mike had been instructed to keep you in the room until you pass, as Nezu is very confident in your abilities on the subject. A calculus test that will be also referenced against your entrance exam, and a physics exam with a lab portion. Aizawa paused and crossed his arms, leaning towards Izuku. Nezu had filed an official request with the Hero Public Safety Commission to have pages from your journal relating to active villains or retired heroes added to the villain database and the Quirk and Valuation Essay collection, respectively. He is requesting the complete collection of your journals on his desk by the next Monday, and as a punishment for your slacking, he has given you detention with him for the rest of the school year. Izuku realized, quite suddenly, that he was struggling to breathe, and that his vision was unfocused. Aizawa stayed silent, watching Izuku's chest heave. Izuku dug his thumbnails into the meat of his pointer fingers, focused on the sensations until he could see clearly again. Though he still felt short of breath and the static still pounded against his ears. Yes, sir, I'm sorry, sir. Izuku managed to sound mostly normal when he finally had the strength to speak. He agreed to whatever the teachers of UA were demanding of him. I will be there, sir. I will do my best. Aizawa flashed a grin at him that was all teeth, fleeting and savage and delighting in a moment, much like a wolf's tail would whip back and forth when it had cornered a prey after chase. Go to the dorms, Midoriya, and get ready for exams. Just do as well as you did on the easy rewrite and you'll be fine. Aizawa told him. Izuku felt some of his anxiety dissolve into astonishment. He stood quickly and nodded so hard that his head hurt. Yes, sir. Izuku nearly sprinted out of the classroom. Thoughts bounced around his mind. Aizawa's confrontation was the cue ball that broke Izuku's carefully arranged triangle of billiard balls made up of lies and stereotypes. It was only when he was lying down in bed, backpack tossed to the side and shoes toed off carelessly in the middle of the room, when Izuku came to the conclusion that he would just have to adjust. Like before he would meet his teacher expectation, a smile threatened to break out across his lips. Unlike before, he might actually have to put in some real effort aside from perfecting his confused face. Still first year, the next day. I cannot believe this! President Mike had his head down, a cheek squinted to the wood grain of his desk, and his sunglasses askew. Izuku gave him a kind of loop-sided smile, where the corners of his mouth didn't actually turn up. I'm sorry, he told President Mike in perfectly pronounced and unaccented English. President Mike dragged the paper across his desk towards himself with a long sigh. I cannot believe that you got away with this for almost an entire school year. How do you even fake not knowing a language? I feel like I should have seen some kind of sign. Another dramatic sign left President Mike's mouth. Get out of her, you fluent little genius. Mike grumbled as he scribbled his signature across the class release form, and then he pushed it towards Izuku. I really am sorry, Izuku said as he grabbed the paper gingerly. I didn't think that things would suddenly... Izuku paused and switched back to Japanese. Break pattern. Mike picked his head up from his desk and looked at Izuku in a way that the teacher never had before. Just pass the rest of your exams, Midoriya. We all know you can do it, so, just... President Mike shouted. Do it. Alright, Izuku replied, turning towards the door. Right, I can do that, muttered Izuku under his breath. Then he grabbed the door handle and it didn't move. Izuku looked over his shoulder at President Mike. Oh, President Mike lounged up from his desk. Oh, sorry, Midoriya, that was just in case. Still first year, the next day. I hope that you know that this is ridiculous, Snipe said. Kids work their butts off to make it into this school and then keep on working just to keep their place, and you, Snipe pointed a gloved finger at him, have been half-assing your way through the hero course on autopilot. I know, I'm sorry, I know that what I've been doing is so unfair to so many people, but Izuku was sweating. The physics exam was laughably easy, but the sitting in Snipe's classroom while he graded the exam was super nerve-wracking and horrible, and Izuku was sweating. Oh, kiddo, I'm not judging you, Snipe said. It's hilarious that we only caught up to your shenanigans. What? Snipe mimed, looking down at the watch, even though his hero costume did not have a watch. 3/4 of the way through the semester. I bet Ned was kicking himself. You work hard together, kiddo. You almost won the sports festival. You got kidnapped. You deserve to be the Midoriya. I mean, at this point, we kinda owe it to you for all the shit that happened to you. Do not tell Aizawa I cursed in front of one of his kids. Izuku stifled a sudden laugh that bubbled up in his throat. There was a reason that Snape was popular among the younger children, and it wasn't just because of his cowboy theme and extreme merch line. That was probably a large part of it. Snape was surprisingly comforting and funny when he wasn't lecturing on physics. I want Sensei, Izuku said, rocking back on his heels. Not to be rude, but did I pass the tester? Oh yeah, Snape said, getting the class release file out of the drawer and signing in one small motion. Was that even a real question? Good luck with the rest of your... Snape brought up his hands to the air quotes. Exams. And get out of my classroom. So first year, the next day. You got 100. Ectoplasm was looking down at the Zuko exam like it had personally wronged him. I put calculus 2 questions on here. You just tested out of 2 years of math classes. Izuku nodded. He was starting to see the humor in all of this, and it might be fun sitting in long classes with older students. It was possible Mirio and his friends might be in some of his classes. Whoop. Izuku... Whoop. Octoplasm held up the 2 class release forms. I will see you in discrete mathematics. I'm the only advanced math teacher on campus aside from the principal. Their first year, but the same day. So, Uraka drew out the wall swinging with her feet over the edge of the dorm roof. You've been pretending to be dumber than you actually are, and the teachers found out you're... So now you're going to be in different classes starting next semester, but we'll still have the same homeroom, right? Yeah, Izuku replied, twisting to look at Uraka's profile from his spot next to her. It was dark out and they couldn't really see any stars, but it was quiet and there was a cool breeze on the roof. This was where Uraraka and Izuku usually always came when they wanted to talk without anyone around. The first week in the dorms, Izuku had come up here in a fit of nostalgia and self-loathing, and Uraka had sleep floating out of her window. When he managed to get her to touch her fingertips together, she landed in a pile on top of him, and they ended up talking after they untangled from each other. Uraka thanked Izuku for saving her during the entrance exam. Izuku thanked Uraka for following his plan for the USJ, and then they started talking about quirks and money and what it felt like to go to school and feel like you were different from everyone else. For Izuku, that meant faking bad test scores and sitting alone at the lounge with bruises under his school uniform. For Uraka, that meant asking the teacher for supplies for school projects, getting teased for having the free school lunch, and never being able to go out to eat with classmates. Uraka was one of the people that he knew he could trust. He wasn't sure why he had been afraid to tell her everything. Well, then everything is fine. Uraka turned to meet his gaze, a gentle smile on her face. You always overthink things, Izuku. No one's going to be mad at you for taking classes where you actually learn something. Uraka tapped a finger against her mouth. Well, actually, a bad Bakugo will be pretty mad, but I'm happy for you, and I'm sure Kirishima will be all, how many of you, bro? And Lita will be all, Uraka moved her hand in robot motion. I am excited for you to pursue a high level of education. Izuku laughed. You're getting seriously good at impressions of our classmates. Oh, as if! Uraka snapped back. None of us will ever be able to beat your pro-hero impressions, so don't even pretend like mine are any good. But they are, Izuku insisted. The pair dissolved into laughter, which eventually dissolved into a contemplative quiet. Uraka leaned back on her hands. The only thing that I don't get is why you're pretending in the first place. Izuku sighed and looked back out toward the horizon. Izuku swallowed. I don't really. I think I just spent so long doing that it never occurred to me to stop. That makes sense, I guess, Uraka said. Like muscle memory or something. Izuku hummed in a way that sounded affirmative. It's like you were in an abusive relationship with every teacher ever, and then you came to UA and you had this history of. Uraka tone suddenly got more intense, almost growling. Every teacher ever sucking. Uraka's voice returned to normal as she shrugged. So you just acted the same way as always? Uraka got up from the edge of the rooftop and held up a hand to him. But you are at UA now. Izuku took her hand and she grabbed so tightly that Izuku felt his bones creak together. So you better start putting in your full effort or I will kill you. Plus Ultra? Izuku responded as Uraka heaved him up. Plus Ultra. Uraka grinned at him. R4 endnotes. R4 endnotes. The Rocky when he learned that Izuku had been holding himself back all semester. Dude, what the fuck? In this timeline, I imagine things are pretty much how they usually go. So like Izuku gets on in the rescue point, blah blah blah, the sport fest happens and Izuku's all, it's your power, which is in this universe is pretty hypocritical. I realized when I was writing Snipe's part of the ending montage would had me laughed. And then Izuku is one getting kidnapped by the League of Villains, and they don't restrain him properly and he manages to escape by sneaking out when they all go to sleep and finding the doctor and taking him hostage as a protection. And then without the doctor, because Izuku gets him arrested, All for One eventually dies. Because the doctor had an extremely convoluted way of keeping the world's greatest supervillain alive, so that All for One couldn't replace him until he wanted to be replaced, and so Izuku inevitably kills One for All, while simultaneously giving Shigaraki an epiphany about different forms of heroism and power. And okay, yeah, I have a problem because I fully did think of all of this despite this being one shot about Saki t-shirts. Anyway, please leave me kudo and a comment, tell me about your favorite lines what your favorite line was, or ask me a question about the questionable timelines I whip up for no reason, or tell me a fic that kind of like this that you would love me to see. And maybe I will use it as an inspiration for another fic to write while I procrastinate uploading my long fic. Whatever you have to say, I will appreciate it. Reader notes. I am so sorry, I'm not going to edit this. I'm so tired, but I really want to do something because after a month of not updating, almost a month of not updating and then just whipping up a re-upload and continuation that I had, I don't know, so long done and just didn't upload it. I'm so sorry. Also, my tablet broke, so we'll see how it will be with thumbnails. The special will be a bit later because, well, my tablet broke. That's very sad. But on another note, I got myself a new microphone, so I'm testing out, the settings and all. So the only thing I noticed is that in some places the noise reductions cuts the words up. So I'm sorry if that annoys you. I'll try to, make it better, but I don't know. Jesus Christ, I'm so tired. I'm so sorry for every mistake I made. You can go look at the fake and actually count the mistakes, or look how it actually is. Yeah, I should stop yapping. Yeah. Well, good night, or good day, good evening, whatever you have. See you later. Or, well, hear you later, whatever.